Ontario's Minister of Energy says he has a plan to power the province for the long haul. And with that, we welcome Bob Chiarelli, who's Ontario's Minister of Energy and the member for the riding of Ottawa West Nepean. It's good to have you back here in the studio.
My pleasure.
Well, let's just share some of the bullet points before we chat about your plan, the Achieving Balance it's called, Ontario's long-term energy plan. And here we go, control room with some of the highlights. First and foremost, conservation, you say. That is the first priority, the first approach. In terms of nuclear, no new plants, but refurbishing the Darlington and Bruce nuclear plants is what's in the cards. A longer phase-in period for renewable energy. Costs will continue to rise, although you tell us slightly less than previously forecast. And there will be financing programs to help homeowners pay for energy-efficient retrofits. Let's just start with a title, Achieving Balance. What is the imbalance you thought needed correcting?
Well, I think it kind of frames the policies or the basic ideas around this government's energy policy. First, reliability. Secondly, clean. And thirdly, affordability. Not in any particular priority, all important. When this government took power in 2003, it was not a reliable system. There were brownouts, we'd lost generation, we were importing close to $1 billion a year in energy. Clean. They had ramped up dirty coal generation to 25%. There were smog days in cities like Toronto and Ottawa, 40, 50 smog days a day. We're down to 2 a year, in each of those cities. Affordable. There's a lot of pressure on prices because we had to invest heavily on the first two. We invested $31 billion in 10 years, 21 billion generation, $10 billion transmission, so that we got a reliable system where we have a surplus situation, and we got a clean system.
But you got to pay for it.
To get rid of cheap coal, we went to renewables and some other hydro, et cetera, and so we invested heavily. As a result of those investments, to have a credible system, there was pressure on prices. We therefore introduced a number of programs to help transition us to where the rates would be more reasonable. That included a number of industrial programs, industrial support program, the clean energy program, and energy tax credits in a number of ways.
I'm going to pick up on this as we go along. You mentioned the word credibility, and I want to follow up on that because this is, I think, the third long-term energy plan that the government has brought forward since 2007, which begs the question, what's the point? It hasn't been that long-term in the past. Why should we believe this one anymore today?
Well, they're not brought in because they're needed on an ad hoc basis. The principle of the plans are that they're renewed every 3 years. They're like an official plan, the City of Toronto or the City of Ottawa or the City of Windsor, where every 4 years the official plan is reviewed and updated, even though it's called a 20-year plan. It's the same principle as that. We're actually tightening it up more. One of the things that's not on your list is the annual energy report that we're requiring from the Independent Electricity System Operator and OPA. They're going to annually share with stakeholders and the public what our supply and demand situation is and how it's changing.
Okay, let me figure that out for a second, because if demand goes down, if demand goes down and supply is up, power should be cheaper. But that's not the case in Ontario. You want us to conserve more, and let's hope we do conserve more. So if we're using less, the prices should come down. Well, why doesn't that happen?
Well, the issue is, what are the investments that are being made in the system? The reason why we're tightening that up is to say we're not going to invest in new nuclear, for example, if there's no need. And that's an issue we have with the Conservatives, because for every investment and every expense goes to the Ontario Energy Board, and goes on the ratepayer base to increase rates over a 20-year period. So the more we know about the system, the more information we have that we should not be making a mistake to generate too much electricity, because you're going to pay for it when you don't need it. Mm-hmm. So that's the rationale around that issue.
Or give it away, for that matter, because we don't have the storage capacity to hang on to it.
Well, there's no storage. But on the other hand, there's another fallacy out there. The other fallacy is that we're giving it away or selling it cheap. Since 2008, the province of Ontario, you can verify with the IESO, has made a $6 billion profit on the trading of electricity. So we always see in the press when we give it away or sell it cheap. You never see in the media when we're exchanging it at a profit at a higher price.
Okay,
because it doesn't make news.
But just so I'm clear, one of the reasons that prices are going to be where they are, despite the fact we may use less, is because we've got all this infrastructure, $31 billion to pay for from the last decade. Is that right?
Well, it's rate-based. Well, first of all, that's not really entirely correct. The rationale for that level of investment is that we had a broken system. We had lost generation, the equivalent of Niagara under the Tories. They had failed to invest in transmission. We lost transmission capacity. So we had to play catch-up to create a credible system. That catch-up cost $31 billion. We also took the opportunity to eliminate $4 billion of healthcare and environmental costs.
By getting rid of coal.
By getting rid of coal.
Okay, let me follow up on another thing. Again, maybe I don't get this, but you want people to conserve. One of the ways people use less of something is if you make it more expensive. But you are going to the markets and borrowing $1 billion to subsidize the cost of electricity and keep it cheaper than it otherwise would be, therefore, presumably, taking away some of our incentive to use less of it. How does that make sense?
Well, what makes sense is the principle that it should be affordable. And there's a level at which it gets to a point where it's problematic for a lot of families. So we have to walk that fine line. That's why, after having made those necessary investments, we created some price supports to help families. One was the clean energy benefit.
$1 billion a year.
10% discount. It's like a tax cut. If you want to look at it in terms of its impact on the community, it's like a tax cut.
Except that we're borrowing the money and charging our kids and grandkids to pay it back.
When we get out of deficit, we won't be borrowing that type of money. Federal government and any government that's in deficit is borrowing money until they get back to balance. That's a reality. So we're very cognizant of the. We've just gone through a consultation for 8 months on the long-term energy plan. And what we heard from industry and what we heard from families is it's got to be affordable. It's got to be affordable.
Yeah,
and so we're working hard to make it affordable.
I hear you. Everybody wants everything to be affordable. You know, you want the new car you buy to be affordable. Yes. But the reality is, you know, don't you have to do some paying as you go?
Well, you know, just let's look at the traditional rate structure. For the 20 years before this Liberal government took over, there were three governments, NDP, Conservative, and Liberal, and the average increase in that period was 3.5%. The long-term energy plan, which this government has done, projects over 20 years, the 2010 plan, 3.4%. This one is projecting 2.8%. The reason why we can project 2.8% is that the factors that push rates up, the investment in the system, we are reducing them. We're eliminating $15 billion in new nuclear investment. We've renegotiated the Samsung contract to take out $3.7 billion of energy purchases from Samsung. The domestic content rules, we're removing those. That's another $1.9 billion we're taking out of the system. Dispatching wind. Wind now is costing the government $200 million less per year because of how it's being dispatched. This long-term energy plan, over 20 years, is taking $70 billion of projected investments out of the system. Therefore, the average investment over that 20 years is going to be 2.8%, not 3.4%.
Okay, I get you. The smart aleck in me wants to say if you renegotiated the Samsung deal, that's an acknowledgement that it was a bad deal to begin with. Fair to say?
Well, circumstances arose and circumstances changed. We had the opportunity, so we took it.
Okay. Nukes. How much are you going to spend? You mentioned you're not going to spend $15 billion building new nukes. You're going to refurbish Bruce and Darlington. How much is that going to cost?
We can't actually give you a cost now. The reason why we can't give you a cost now is because it's got to go to tender. And if we say it's going to cost X amount, or this is the budget, then it's going to take the competition out of the price. So it's very, very important that we don't indicate that. What we have indicated is that the refurbishment is going to be in stages, a number of stages. We're taking them one stage at a time. If the first stage or the current stage is over budget or over time, we will be absolutely reconsidering the refurbishment schedule as to whether we're going to continue or not. We know that nuclear has a bad reputation of going over budget and over time.
Only because it always does.
Well, this time, it's not going to go over time, and if it does, we're cutting the program. We're cutting the program.
Let me ask you a more philosophical, overarching question. I know you weren't the Minister of Energy who made the decision to cancel the gas plants in Oakville and Mississauga, costing ratepayers $1 billion. Having said that, you're the guy with the job right now. And I just want to know whether you think your government still has any credibility when it comes to dealing with energy issues in this province.
We have tremendous credibility. If you are suggesting that the gas plant issue destroys all other credibility of having a clean system, eliminating coal, having a surplus, going to renewables, going to high technology with smart meters, which give a lot of potential for conservation and demand management. Those are all huge successes. Now let's look at the gas plants. Okay? The Premier has admitted that they were poorly sited. But let's keep in mind, we have done 21 procurements on gas plants, and 19 of them are operating in willing host communities. That's number one. So there were 2 that were cited incorrectly, without going into a lot of detail. All parties asked to have them relocated. Tim Hudak, we've got quotes from immediately before the cancellation, where he was estimating that to relocate them and cancel them would cost close to $1 billion. And about 5 days later, he supported canceling them. So where's his credibility on this issue?
Well, in fairness, the NDP were the only ones who said, don't ask me to commit to this until I know how much it's going to cost. Well, they were the only ones to worry about the cost, I think.
No, they wanted to cancel, but they weren't committed to relocation, but they wanted to cancel. So the reality is there are 2 communities now, Oakville and Mississauga, who are happy that they don't have the plants. We have 2 communities now to make it 21 out of 21 who are willing hosts. You talk to Bob Bailey from Sarnia. He's got a smile on his face.
He's happy, and I'm sure people in Napanee are happy.
He likes the jobs.
Right.
So we've got 4 communities who are happy with the decision.
Doesn't that $1 billion, though, just, grind your gears?
Well, you know, the $1 billion, it's not quite $1 billion, but the $1 billion, if you want to use that number, compare that to the $20 billion that we're taking out of the system that will be in the same cost pressure circumstances. It's way, way outnumbered by what we're doing to improve the cost picture than what that cost is. The other thing is, we're going to have 2 operating plants. They're going to have costed more, but they're operating plants in 4 communities who have been made happier because of it. And all parties wanted them canceled. That's on record. You've heard the quotes over and over and over again. And incidentally, the NDP will now hear complaining about private sector involvement in the energy sector, particularly gas plants. Well, they procured and installed 7 gas plants when they were in government.
Okay, that's 20 years ago, though.
Well, but still, they've done it. They understand
it was none of these New Democrats. It was previous New Democrats, and the head of that New Democratic government isn't even a New Democrat anymore. So that's ancient history. But that doesn't take away from the fact, Minister Chiarelli, that we're glad you spared some time for us here at TVO. Thanks for coming in and helping us with this.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Bob Chiarelli, the Minister of Energy, Ottawa West Nepean MPP.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.